Hello, my name is Kimberly and I am the owner of So Sassy Stitcher in Northwest Arkansas. And I am working on the Riley Blake pillow of the month from Stitch in Heaven in Texas. I ordered it several months ago back in August, and then finally at the end of January they shipped it. It took about 10 days to get. And I finally got it. Came in a cute little box with all of the fabrics and the instructions. And I'm just gonna kind of go over things with you guys in case you have any questions. And there are tons of little pieces in this guy. So it will be interesting to see how it comes together. And it has, flip this over so you guys can see. So it's got a cute little Easter egg basket with some chicks and some flowers. It's 38 by 16. So we'll see how this little guy comes together. The first thing that I did is I looked through all of the instructions to see if there was anything that I needed to change or adjust. Some patterns have mistakes in them. We're all human, we all make mistakes, but I just like to check and make sure that there's nothing that I can or need to change. There are some of these techniques that you could potentially oversize your pieces a little bit and then trim them down. When you're working with a lot of triangles, they can tend to get wonky and get off of square. And so if you have the ability to make them a little bit larger and trim them up, then it takes away most of that wonkiness. You can square them up again. However, there's a lot of triangles in here. I didn't want to try to go through everything and figure out whether they had the correct amount to be able to square up. And I was also concerned that I might not have enough fabric to do that with. So, especially being the first one. So I just cut everything the way that they said, with a few exceptions. And I'm gonna go over those. So as you can see, I have 2 pages of cutting instructions. I just started at the top and I worked my way down. So the first one was the background fabric, okay? And before I started that, you can see that next to each of the instructions, they have a label for these guys and it corresponds with what you're doing. So background, chick, flower, egg, basket, whatever. So easiest thing to do is you can use like painter's tape, masking tape, that type of thing. Easiest thing to do is just get to some small labels. And I just went through and I wrote all of these down so that as I cut, I could put them on. Now you can see I have a few left over. There were a lot of the EG1s, EG2s, and EG3s. And that's because there were like 1 or 2 of each of the different colors that go into that block. And so when I was cutting those, I just left the first one there and I labeled it. And then as I cut those blocks, and if it, was another EG1, I just put it on the stack. And so I didn't end up labeling each individual color. So I do have a few extra left over, but no biggie. They're pretty inexpensive. So that is a great way to keep everything organized so that you know exactly what you're grabbing. These are very small pieces. They're very similar pieces. You have 1-inch squares, you have 1 1/4-inch squares, 1 1/2-inch squares of the same fabric, even like 1 3/4 and 1 7/8 squares. So you could end up doing a lot of remeasuring to figure out which ones you're supposed to get. Whereas if you just label them real quick, then it becomes really easy. These stickers come off without a problem on your fabric, so you really don't have to worry about it messing up your fabric at all. Even if you run an iron over them, they still come off really easily, which is super nice. So once I had all my labels, I started cutting. Now, the way that they do this is they're trying to get the most efficient use out of the fabric. And so I followed the first instruction, the 3.5 by width of fabric, and made a 38.5-inch piece out of that. Then it says to subcut again into 14.5 by width of fabric. Well, I had about 16 inches 15 to 16 inches left. There was no other subcuts there. It was really just then continuing to subcut. So I did not trim this to 14.5 because I didn't want to waste that little bit that I had left over that I might be able to utilize. So then when I had the next one, the one strip 8.25 by 14.5, I disregarded that 14.5 and I just cut that with the fabric that I had 8.25, and I just cut off chunks. And then as I went along, and they have it built really nicely that they have the wider strips at the beginning, and then you work your way down to the smaller strips that you need and smaller pieces that you need. But so I started with that 8.25, cut what I needed to. Well, I had a little bit left over. So then I went to the next one. What can I get out of that? And then I cut the 6.25, because I didn't have enough to get it all out of that. But I just really worked with what I had first and then continued to cut. If I had little bits that I couldn't use at that point, if something else came up down below that I could use, I used those pieces before I cut more off of my big piece. That way, if I mess up, I still have a big piece that I can cut off of, or a bigger piece that I can cut off of, and then I can potentially use it for something else too. Just trying to be as efficient as possible with my pieces of fabric. There is one mistake that I found in the pattern. As you can see here, they did not mark how many of these strips that you needed. You actually need 3 of the 11.5 by 1.5 and 2 of the 1.5 by 1.25 rectangles. Like I said, really small pieces. So they wanted 3 strips of the 1.5 by what you had left, the 14.5 or 16, whatever I had. The next one is also 1.5 wide, and they want 2 strips. I was actually able to get these 2 pieces out of only 4 strips of the 1.5. And so if you want to, you can cut only those 4, see if you can get it all out of what you have. And then if you need to cut more, you can. So that was a change that I did. I think all of the colors worked out relatively easily and well. So I started constructing. Once I got all of my pieces cut, then, it was kind of scattered and all over the place. So I took those pieces, I organized them by category. So all the egg, all the chick, all the background, and I put them in order 1 through whatever, or A through whatever it went through. And I put them in order because generally, not always the case, but generally that's how you're going to work through them when you put a quilt together. So the first thing that I started working on was the flower. And if you've never done half square triangles, they can be a little tricky to get straight. They did give you a little bit extra, just a tiny fraction of an amount to be able to square these up. And so that's really nice. So what I did is you follow the instructions for which pieces go together. So the yellow and the dark pink, and then on the next page, it is the light pink and dark pink. And they tell you to make a line down the diagonal corner to corner, and then stitch 1/4 inch from that line. They make this little tool. It's really handy. It has a line down the center, and then it's 1/4 inch from that line to each edge. And so I use this a ton for doing half square triangles or things like that, where you want to stitch 1/4 inch from the corner, from that center, in order to make 2 half square triangles out of those pieces instead of just 1. So you put that middle line on your corners, and then I really like these friction markers or pens. I like the marker a little, this is called a fine liner, better than the pens because they don't catch on the fabric. These are more of a felt tip, And so they glide really smoothly along the fabric, and they're not going to cut your fabric like the pins do. And then when you iron these, that line goes away completely. So it's really nice, especially for something like this. Now, if you need that line to stay through an ironing process, these are not the thing to use. So I just mark along either side of that, and then you can see that line. Now, when you fold things over like this, I want that fold right on that line. Well, if I put my stitches on that line, it's not gonna fold there. It's gonna fold a little past that because it has to account for that stitch. So when I stitch, I actually stitch just to the inside of that line. And that's going to allow that square to open up fully. It's kind of like stitching a scant 1/4 of an inch. I'm going scant to the inside to allow that to open up fully. When I'm done with that, when I'm done stitching these and I chain stitch them, then I can cut them apart down that diagonal, okay? Then when I open them up, I'm gonna have that, I should have that 2 inch. Now they did give you a little bit extra so that you can square them up. And I have a little ruler that is specific 2.5 inch triangle. These are 2 inch triangles, but as you can see, there is a line for 2 inch as well. You can use any ruler that allows you to know where your 2 inch mark is, or however big that triangle is. There's lots of square up rulers for this. I like this little guy because it's less cumbersome, especially working with smaller pieces. So that 2 inch line is going to go on your stitch line. And I actually put it on the line that I drew, giving myself just a smidge extra so that I'm not undercutting at all. Really need to change the blade on my thing, and I have been lazy and haven't done it. Now, I also go ahead and just free cut the corners off, making sure that I don't cut my stitches, so that when I open this up and iron it, you don't see those dog ears sticking out. So it's nice and clean. If I didn't do that, I'd have these dog ears sticking out like this, and I would want to trim those up so that I get rid of that bulkiness when I'm putting all of this together. So then you can iron these open. I am disregarding some of their ironing instructions, or at least what I'm assuming are their ironing instructions. A lot of their ironing instructions are saying to iron things, the seams open. So pulling your seams open like this and ironing it like this. I don't like to do this if I don't have to, because it creates a weaker stitch. And you're more likely to pop those stitches open when you're putting things together. Now, there are some instances where you need to reduce that bulk, and it's a good idea, but you want to be careful with it. And there's a really good way to do the pinwheel that they're talking about and be able to have it lay flat and reduce that bulk. Because that's really what they're trying to accomplish by opening up those seams, is reducing that bulkiness, okay? And so you can see that I put them together, okay? I squared them up, ironed them out, then I put it together in the pinwheel pattern. You sew top and bottom together, and then you're going to sew these together. And part of the reason why I like to iron one side to the other is because when you do that and you do them opposite, then they nest together really nicely, and you don't even have to pin that seam, especially with being just one seam. You can if you want to, but you don't have to, because you just nestle them together and they just sit in there so nicely. Whereas if they were open, it would slide around on you. You would need to pin it to get a nice crisp corner right there. You can just throw that under your machine and those nestle really, really nicely. Okay. And you can see I've got a nice clean center here. And the issue with why they want these open is because you get this big bulky seam right in the center here. You've got, I don't know, like 8 layers of fabric there. And so that doesn't sit very nicely, especially when you're quilting it. You're going to get a big bump there. So there is actually a way that you can pop the seams without making it an open hole in your quilt, without compromising the structure of it, but have it lay flatter. And so I can actually so I've got this seam coming forward, these seams going this way. I'm actually just gonna flip this one over and pop those seams a little bit. And that's gonna lay that really nicely. And then I can just re-iron this one so that you get this nice circle of seams, and this lays nice and flat, and it would be just as flat as if you had done open seams. Okay, so this is a really easy way to keep those seams going one direction and then still having it nice and flat. When I did these, I ironed them all to the darker color so that you reduce the shadowing on those lighter colors. So those are the start of the pinwheels for the flowers. And then because I do a lot of chain stitching and things like that, when I have those pieces and there's not a whole ton of them, I then start to work on the next piece of it and then go back and forth. If that doesn't work for you, that is completely fine. Do the method that works best for you. I can keep track of a couple things at once and not have too much of an issue. Yes, I make mistakes because I'm human, but do really what works for you. So you can see I have been working on the leaves for the flower. And so you are going to do the stitch and flip method. So you can see that I made the line down the diagonal of my piece, corner to corner. And again, when I sewed it, I sewed just scantly inside of that line towards this corner. And that's going to allow, and you can see it on this side, that piece to come all the way across. If I had sewn on that line, it would be just shy of coming all the way across because it has to account for those stitches. So I wanted you to see that. You want to scantly just come inside in order to make that fold over really nicely and not have it be short when you fold it over. I went ahead and did both corners before I trimmed anything up. Now I did go ahead and instead of, you're going to trim this piece off. Okay. So why didn't I trim this before I ironed it? And I'm going to tell you. Now I gotta find my ruler. There's a ruler that we use in paper piecing called Add a Quarter. And it is a ruler with a little lip that is exactly 1/4 inch. If you iron these guys like they're supposed to be, and then you open it back up and you put that Add a Quarter to where that little lip is on that stitch line, it fits in there really nicely and it doesn't want to slide over that stitch line, okay, because that other piece of fabric has come up a little bit and created a ridge, and that will allow that Add a Quarter ruler to sit there. So then I can take and trim that up and then have it lay over nicely, and it's still coming all the way across, and it will actually give you a crisper line if you do it that way. I could totally trim it like this, and I can even use my Add a Quarter to do it, but you can see it wants to slide across that. Whereas if you have it like this, it doesn't want to slide. Okay. And so it just makes it easier to trim up with it without it slipping. Makes it nice and crisp. Okay. So just a couple of tricks for you to get these not to be crazy and wonky and get nice crisp lines for you. I'm going to keep working on this, and I will be back to show you more tips and tricks as I go along and figure this out. And I really hope that this helps you, especially if you're somewhat of a beginner doing triangles for the first time. They can be very, very frustrating. And so these are some tricks that I have learned over the past several years in my quilting journey, taking classes and from some amazing instructors. And so I wanted to pass that along to you. I hope it helps, and good luck making this. And if you have tips and tricks for me, pop me a note and let me know. If you have questions, you can do the same, and I will do my best to answer them. I will post another video when I am working on get these flowers finished and working on another section.